I went ahead because the questions and the needs become so different between elementary and secondary that we are put secondary in the conference room and elementary over here. About 3 of the topics overlap, but they thought just easier to kind of break us up and get time to get your questions answered and topics that we thought were important to you. So the reason I asked you to bring your Surface books today is because one of the things I heard we've been hearing for a while is that it's really a struggle to find resources. And so I'm going to have us spend a little bit of time on Insight 24J at the end of the time, and then I'm going to ask you to tell us the most important places you go and the things you need off of Insight 24J to the classroom teacher. If you're a speech-language pathologist and there are important things to you, just make sure you note that on your page that you're not a regular classroom teacher, because I've asked Bob Silva and Caitlin Combest, who you're going to meet in a minute, to spend some time with Insight 24J and reshuffle it a little bit so that the stuff that goes right out to classrooms, the social emotional learning stuff, some of that stuff is quick and easy for people to find. The other thing that we'll accomplish during that time is if you are somebody that actually goes to the Office of Behavioral Learning a lot, or you wish you knew when things were updated on that site, Caitlin will come around and help show you how to set up an alert for those sites and to see if that's helpful in getting resources, because then they come right to you, an alert comes right to your inbox if something is updated on the site. So for me, I might want to set an alert for district news, or if I like the staff profile, some of those things. And some of them are easier to have a nice alert for, not. But we thought, well, let's show you how you can do that in a couple places, but also get some feedback from you so we can spend some time really updating this, restructuring the site a bit. So what I'm going to say to you is, I'm going to start with school calendar then. So we're going to do that last. I was waiting to see. Courtney's like, do you have a okay. School calendar. The question is, where are we at with the school calendar? So we had a draft of the school calendar that made it through the calendar committee. Somewhere in the shuffle of transition of leadership, we didn't get it back. So that's on, I'll just say that's on me. But the calendar itself really shows some significant changes in the schedule for next year. So the calendar committee, I think there was some that said that we had to get the conferences away from breaks, but actually it was the calendar committee who came up with some guiding principles around the calendar. So our goal is to increase parent and family engagement at conferences, make conferences as timely as possible with the hope of providing students and parents adequate time to avoid failing grades, especially at the high school level when they wait till the end of November. We know that first 6 weeks of high school sets the future for the year. Proactively use conference time to invite and encourage parent attendance. Strive for full school weeks as much as possible. Consider the needs of our students who experience food insecurity at home. Consider the impacts of the calendar on our hourly employees, and ensure that the work week for licensed personnel does not exceed 40 hours. So those were the things the calendar committee agreed to as they began these discussions around the school calendar. So what has happened, though, is we've started looking at the numbers of days that elementary aren't in school and secondary are, and we know that the one day that was lowest in student attendance this year so far is the date when elementary was out and secondary was in. So we've kind of taken the principles and looked a little bit further about, are there some different ways? So the calendar committee is reconvening next week to relook at. It may come out identical to the one you've seen, or they may consider some tweaks. My goal is that before winter break, we have next year's calendar set and we get it out to people. There was at least one school that thought it might be good to bring some feedback on the calendar, so I've taken that and I'm going to pass it to Jim Orth, who's leading that calendar committee process at that time. And as soon as we get it out, we'll, and they make some final decisions around it, we'll get it out to you. Yes?
How do you get concerns to that committee if you aren't that person?
If you wanted to email them to Christy Patton, the person who emails you about the agenda. I was going to say to me, and I was like, you don't want to rely on my inbox. It's like got 100 unopened right now. So the person who emails you about these meetings, email her and just put in the subject line calendar. And then we will take that and pass it to the calendar committee for next week. So, yes.
I had seen on one draft that it had basically like grading day and conferences like the same
Yes.
3 days or something.
Yep.
And I had heard that may have been a mistake because it wasn't the original plan, or is that? I guess I'm worried. Are we going to have our report cards
Done in time.
Because in the past we've been told they can leave time.
Yeah, I don't have that in front of me. Would you email me that question? And I will look at the calendars in my inbox and answer if that was a mistake or not. Yeah.
Are you able to speak to the first calendar week that talks about like 40-hour work week, 24 hours must be conferences, kids are in school these days? Because it seemed like, from what I saw, that was going to require possibly more evenings from staff.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't hear in the guiding principles that staff, like outside of our normal contract time, was a guiding principle. So if they're asking for additional evenings of staff, is that what's being asked of in that week?
I think what's being asked of in that week is that you adjust work schedules in order to meet what would be good times for parents. And I think that the next job of the calendar committee was going to be to put some sideboards on that in directions for school principals as they set those weeks.
Because just concerns is like staff members having to get their own childcare.
Exactly. Yeah.
That adds additional stress in.
Mm-hmm.
So what considerations are made for that?
Yep. Yep. And this was a joint committee. This was not us in the back room. We really just deciding this. We had both classified and licensed employees at the table to really vet this. So, but again, since it kind of went in this lingering time, we now are going to reconvene this calendar committee to look at it again. Yes?
Question, it would be assumed then maybe each school would maybe come up with their own schedule within that 40 hours?
Yep.
Is that
Yes, that was what as I recall, what the calendar committee wanted was that flexibility for schools to set up their weeks differently. But what I also heard from in another place was that we want to be sure we put good parameters around that. And so that, and the calendar committee felt like they should jointly do that so that, one school, somebody wasn't saying, oh, you have to work every night this week, or so to try to put some parameters around that.
Christy, can you repeat the questions into the microphone so that
Yes.
people who are watching can hear?
I can do that. Okay, let me look at what's next for me. Heidi, do you want to do you had some questions? Sorry, yeah. Okay, all right, so Heidi went through, here, you have to do this first. Okay. Heidi went through the questions that came out of the elementary, and she's going to answer a few of them here. She'll state the question first, and then there were some groups of questions from schools, so she's going to also take those questions and be sure that each of the level directors sees the questions and can work with school principals to be sure that you're giving answers directly to those schools as well.
Yeah, just one more note on the calendar committee. Jim Orth reached out to each of our principals, and they were able to give some feedback, and I know some of them even included staff in giving that feedback as well. So I feel like we have a good body of feedback for the calendar committee to consider. So, okay. All right, so I'm just going to start going through these questions. The first one that's not on my page, we had to divide the packet, but it really talked about school-based health assistance and medical needs of kids and those increasing in schools. And so most of my answers will be really sympathetic because I know that the medical needs in schools are increasing, and that's a big draw on the time of our office staff and teachers as well. To remedy that, we did put in place school-based health assistance this year in the elementary schools, which we haven't had in the past. We haven't gotten a lot of feedback about that, but I'm assuming it's a significant support. I see a lot of nods. So significant support to schools as they try, especially around those noon hours when kids are coming in for medication, and to strategically use some of those times. If you have students with, diabetes or other medical needs, it's probably not going to feel like enough, and so we'll continue to look for ways in order to support staff. But we realize that it might just not be enough resource in some situations. Are there any specific questions around that? Okay. So there was another question about financial compensation for teachers serving in leadership roles in the schools. So a number of years ago, I think it was probably around our financial crisis of 2008-ish. So then we discontinued the use of leadership differentials in Salem-Keizer. So we had a number of those leadership roles in schools, and they were really helpful to principals and to teachers in being able to have a voice. So we weren't able to use those, but I think we've put into place a different practice that's been useful in that our office, the elementary education office, gives each school leadership dollars each year. And so those can be used at the principal's discretion, not as a stipend, so it's a little bit different than before they got a flat amount for their work that year. And then this is more a principal maybe coming to a teacher or another staff member and saying, hey, we need to make a schedule for testing. Would you be willing to do that? You're really good at scheduling, and you could do that on your off time, or do it during school time and do your other planning during off time, so that you would be compensated directly for the number of hours worked would be the number of hours of compensation you would receive. I know not every school does it that way, but I think most schools do it that way. And so if you attend a leadership team meeting during the school day, then in most cases those wouldn't be compensated because we can't pay you twice for the same work hours. But if you're staying late, I know most principals use those leadership dollars to compensate teachers to maybe stay till 5 o'clock if they're part of the leadership team. So it's more of a direct pay for the hours worked instead of a flat compensation. Any questions about that? Yeah.
Is that only for leadership members, or say if you're on like a PBIS committee and you're doing additional work, can they use the money in that same capacity?
So the question was, can principals have the flexibility to use that to pay staff for other purposes? And the answer is yes. But there are a limited amount of dollars. So I think the highest amount that a principal got was $4,000. So, you spread that across 44 schools. It's a budget item for sure, but it does help. It really helps principals to be able to get some buy-in from staff and get to be able to compensate people for their hard work. Another question is, why do some schools meet twice weekly for data teams and other schools meet once weekly? And so some schools are further along in the data teams process. And so they are dual cycling around 2 content areas. Sometimes they do that within one meeting. So they're cycling around literacy, and they're also cycling around math. Some In some cases, I know one of my schools, they have an extra planning period. So instead of 7 during the school contact day, they have 8 30-minute sessions. And so their principal asks them to use that extra time to have a second meeting of their data teams. And then in some cases, it's optional. So it does vary. We've left that up to leadership teams and principals to make the decision on the number of times they meet. So, but always within the contract as well. Another question is about substitutes for, so just chime on in if you've got questions about those things. Substitutes for all staff when they're absent, including counselors, behavior specialists, and principals. We're short-staffed, and then that makes it even harder. So in many circumstances when we have an extended absence for a behavior specialist or a counselor, John Bate, our wonderful executive director of human resources, has been great in allowing us to substitute that. But the onesie twosie, you know, I'm going to be gone on Friday for my personal day and I'm the counselor. We are not substituting those because the work of the counselors and behavior specialists are pretty unique. And it would be really challenging for someone to step in and do it justice and be worth the resource that we're spending. And in the sub shortage, we want to prioritize those to the classrooms to work with kids. So if we've had a 6 weeks absence, absolutely we're going to find a way to get you an additional person. Now for the behavior specialist, it's not going to be probably a trained behavior specialist. It's going to be a teacher, maybe a retiree who's on the sub list that can come in. I know we did that at Pringle last year, and we've done it at a couple other places. So we'll do that. I was going to answer your question, but I was going to make sure I answered most of that. Yeah, I think so. Yes. Okay.
Our counselors and our behavior specialists have actually ended up having to fill in some of those roles.
Okay.
So like I have 2 students that pretty much my counselor and my behavior specialist, if I didn't have them, like if they're gone,
Yeah.
it's a disaster.
Okay.
And so I hear what you're saying about
Yeah.
not being able to have a sub that's trained in those positions.
Sure.
But sometimes just a body, because right now when
Yep.
I have a blowout and I need to call for help, that's who comes and helps, and now
Okay.
there's nobody to come and help.
Okay.
Just food for thought, and
Yeah, I
don't
appreciate
know
that.
if it can be on someone's radar for that.
Okay.
Depending on need of school, like we can't not have these people here.
I get it. So the question for those listening online was for some counselors and some behavior specialists are filling alternate roles, and they're one-on-one with students who need support. And so one part about it I didn't answer was for principals who are absent, and we have a whole group of retirees, and I don't know if you've seen any of the new buildings that are helping support our schools, so we pay them hourly to come to school. So if that was the case, you know, I think we could send in a retired principal, we could send in a retired, we're willing to make adjustments as needed, but the 1 day absence, those are harder for us to respond to. But we'll do our best if we know of the need. Yeah. Questions about substitutes? Yeah. There was one question about, you guys asked some hard questions, by the way. There's a question about EGC programs and what the path is to get into an EGC classroom. And I wanted to skip over it, but I didn't. And
I have a number answer for you too.
oh, you do? Perfect. What was it?
Last year we did 110 EGC placements.
Yeah. I thought it was 60. I thought I had heard David Fender, but we still are placing students in more restrictive environments like special classrooms. And so it is a misunderstanding that I have heard multiple people say that we don't do placements in more specialized classrooms anymore. And so there is a process for that. It has evolved over the last couple of years, so it looks different. At our last principals meeting, David Fender came and presented it to the principals. He had a nice little flow chart. So I think checking back in with your leadership team or your administrator might be helpful in clarifying what that process is. I didn't know the questions before I came, so I didn't have the opportunity to bring that flow chart to help you understand. But it really originates with the program assistant for that school, and some observations and communication at student services. And but there is a path for students. Craig and I were talking about this earlier. Do you want to? You said it so eloquently. You want to come up and say your piece? Okay. All right.
I'll introduce myself. Thanks. I feel welcomed. I'm Craig Sproles, and I am the newly hired. That's why she said she hasn't introduced me yet. I've been on the job. I think this is 6 weeks-ish on the job. I'm the director for academic achievement, focusing on elementary. And a lot of people are wondering, well, what in the world is that? And so Linda Myers and I have split the work, and Linda used to be the director of special programs or special projects, which was just kind of a hodgepodge of lots of different things going on in the district. And so we've split that work to be able to focus more, to be able to direct our focus more on all of you, and to be able to better support our building principals and the classrooms where the action actually happens. So I'm focusing on elementary, and Linda is focusing on secondary. 7 weeks ago, I was an elementary principal in Albany. Before that, I was an elementary teacher. So I have the concerns that you're bringing up are things where I just keep thinking, oh, that's very, very similar to things that we dealt with in Albany as well. So the specialized classroom comment that Heidi and I were talking about, placing a student in one of those classrooms, as all of you know, is a really, really big decision. Most students who are placed in specialized classrooms can be successful. It's not that there's not points of success, but our lowest graduation rate for kids who are completers are kids who come out of specialized classrooms. So we have to be really careful about those placements and really cognizant about how we support those kids, and then also trying to think about it always as a pathway back to build up the lagging skills, to have a pathway back in. So that's why, and I remember so many times feeling like, oh my word, this is taking forever. And some decisions like those ones are big decisions that have lots of steps. So that's all we said. Probably her. She knows I know that. That's all I know right there. That's her. Yeah.
I just was going to comment, though, that the EGC placement, as much as they're, it's good to know that there's still a pathway, but I, always just from my own experience, that's what we draw from. Last year, I did have 31 students in my classroom, and one of them was somebody who needed a one-on-one at that time when we were having one-on-ones for kids with special needs. And the process was difficult, and I didn't know if we were going to end with a placement. It did end up that he was able to, everybody, supported it eventually. But it was oftentimes, though, that I would hear from the special or the program assistants or whoever, I'm not sure, our building felt like it was the best thing for him to be in an EGC classroom. But like the autistic specialist, these people were saying, no, we're really trying to do that less, and we want to try all these things. And we did. We gave it a really, we did all kinds of things. Yeah. But we were hearing it from them that that's not something that they want to do anymore. So it's not so much we're not, we're saying that they're not doing it, or we're hearing it from principals. We're hearing it from, some of those program, I'm not sure their title is. They're saying we're trying, and I know they're trying to minimize it. They're trying to try out to see if we can have them be successful in regular ed classroom. But with 31 first graders, and then this guy taking over to the point where he's spending half the day or more outside of the classroom, that wasn't good for anybody, and we
Yep.
kept trying to, you know, be heard on that. But I think that's where sometimes our underlying, you know, frustration can be felt, is that we're in it every day, and yet
Right.
we're not sure. The people that come in and do these observations and bring a reward system and then leave after even a couple weeks or whatever, don't see the impact on the regular, you know, all the whole, you know, just everybody. And
Yep.
so I think that we seem to see this more and more frequently because we're trying to have less placements, which we understand and
Yep.
support that, you know. But it was definitely the message, they're trying to get away from that altogether,
Okay.
or the district. So that's what we were told.
Okay, so the concern was around some mixed messages that school staff received from specialists or internal staff compared to outside staff. So I can only say we're just trying to get better at this. I feel like last year was kind of a reset year in how we did some things. And so I think it's better this year, and I feel like more people are aware of what we're trying to do. And in general, your school is the best place for those students. So I really appreciate your spirit behind that, in that you know, that some students need really specialized restrictive environments, but most kids just belong at our school with accommodations to meet their needs. So thanks. We'll try and get better at that.
Well, one thing as a special ed person is talking with David Fender and even Chris Moore and others, is that the communication gap, because as a
Yep.
special ed provider, in saying, you know, maybe this child does need a specialized placement, and having a counselor or behavior specialist, oh no, we aren't doing that at all anymore.
Sure.
So the communication
Yep.
between the different departments, even within the building, or just, you know, well, if you're going to have functional behavior analysis or call in the behavior specialist, it would be good if you contacted the case manager. So there's still the disconnect.
Yep.
And I know it's only been
Yep.
a very short time since all that happened, and I love the fact we can access cadre without
Yep.
having a child on an IEP.
Yep.
But even talking to the special ed department that we have meetings, it's like there still needs to be more communication.
Yep.
So that we're all kind of helping.
One of my most experienced principals, who usually always has things under control, came to me and said, I don't know how to do this, and this, as far as, you know, getting behavior supports for kids. And that was like in September. And so I said, that's a problem. If you don't know, I'm guessing that others don't know as well. So we got together, the three of us got together with David Fender, and he laid out a whole sheet for principals that we gave them at their last meeting that said, if you want to do this, do this. If you know, here's how to request behavior cadre. Here's how to, you know, fill out this form. And I know they're really trying to streamline some of the forms too, because she was pointing out some redundancies in those forms. And so you don't have much time in schools, and you're really overstretched. And so we don't want to put up barriers for you to gain things that kids need. So we are trying to work on that, but it's a work in progress.
And I think also it's important to acknowledge that the frequency and intensity of behaviors have increased. And not just in Salem-Keizer. They've increased. If you're OPB listeners, you might have been listening to the OPB reports right now. And Christy has asked me to put together a board report on traumatic experiences, the way they're impacting our young learners. First grade is probably the apex of it right now, but there's lots of other grades as well. So I think this is our big learning as an educational institution. I feel pretty good about how to teach fundamental reading skills. I have a little bit about math, really good with reading, a little bit about math, behaviors, how to teach these proactively in a way that's not emotionally attaching to me, and teach that in a community and keep my community of learners moving forward. That's what keeps me up at night. That issue keeps me up at night. So I think it is not, I wish it was something where we could say this flow chart, we're going to hand this to you and you're going to be like, oh my word, This is exactly what I've been waiting for. It's not, because we're learning the work as we're doing the work, and then we're going to try this thing, and then we're going to have to learn the work as we do the work there, as well as educators all over. That doesn't mean that we're not trying things, and that doesn't mean that there aren't answers to be learned, but this is the hardest thing, I think, right now in education, is figuring out how to do that and meet really complex academic standards as well. There's complexity across the board. So anyway, yeah.
Okay, this is one for Christy, maybe. So, district have any plans to financially compensate? Oh, nope, wrong one. It's talking about PE 5 days a week in elementary schools. Do we have plans to do that?
So let me talk budget for a minute. How about that? That's always a fun topic. So yeah, look at that. So the question was about 5 days a week of PE in elementary schools, and you know that has budget implications. That's people. So I don't know where the budget is going to land for next year yet, and PE will be among all the things in there that we think about. Is it the right time to add more PE, more behavior specialists, more special ed teachers, more classroom teachers? So we'll put all that into the mix. But what I want to tell you about the budget, which I feel like is really good news right now, the governor's budget that she proposed will be okay for Salem-Keizer. So right now, I don't project that we've always been looking to this next biennium and worried about our PERS rates, but we have some things with our PERS rates that have gone down a little bit. And so we as a district, if we can get to what the governor has proposed in her base budget, we will be okay. Now, I don't know that that means we can add, but I know right now I don't think it means we can subtract. So I just feel like, okay, we can at least breathe. What we want to watch in the legislative session, though, is her investment package, because the investment package is where she is really working to invest in that well-rounded education. And it's the first time in my career, and this is year 30, that I have seen the governor's proposal line up with OEA's, what OEA is saying is needs, lined up with what our co-chairs of our legislature have said are needs, because they went out in Oregon and they heard all the same things, which I wanted to say, well, that's what we've been telling you. But when you hear it from the people on the ground, it's really impactful. So I just want us to breathe during the legislative session. I'll tell you if that changes in any way, and then we'll come back to what's it mean if there are strategic investments that can happen, or if the dollars yield some ads. And I just don't have that answer at all. So, all right, you have one more question? Okay. See, there were we hadn't had time for questions for a while. So.
Yeah, Sandy and Olga are gonna have to pay me back for this one. Okay, this is a question about field trips and students who are exhibiting Tier 3 behaviors and going on field trips. So another really, really, really hard thing for school staff. So my answer when a principal calls me and says this is always, is there educational value to the field trip? And I hope they say yes, because we would expect that there's learning to be happening on a field trip, that it's essential to student learning. And so if it is, then it can't be optional for all kids to participate. And so we need to find ways, and the responsibility is on the school to find ways to include students in all learning experiences, including field trips. So we can ask parents if they could participate with us in the field trip, and that's a helpful suggestion, and it works really well. If a parent is unable to participate in the field trip, then we're going to need to provide a parent-like person for that student to be able to access the field trip. So that might mean shuffling around some resources. It might mean the principal calling elementary ed to see if we can help support them with some dollars to get an additional staff member to be able to attend the field trip. It might even be a couple of staff members that are required to do, and hopefully not reconsidering the educational experience. But I know that that goes through educators' minds when they're thinking about taking a group of kids to off-site. Other things like sending someone in a car so that you have a backup plan if something were to go wrong. There's all sorts of things that your principal and leadership team could consider to help make that successful. But to not include the student isn't an option. Yes.
Would that hold true for outdoor school as well?
Yes. So the question was, does that hold true for outdoor school as well? And it does. So, and that will just make the plans even harder because it's just an extended period of time. But make sure that they know, and I think principals know that they can call us and brainstorm, and we can support with resources. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Taggart?
Yep. I just wanted to make a mention about Craig's position. Remember that we put Jim Orth in as an interim superintendent, and we didn't backfill his position. So because you see Craig here doesn't mean we immediately, it was totally financially neutral, and a way we were hoping to better support schools and classrooms. So I just wanted to say that out loud. All right, Suzanne West, if you have not met her before, she was a principal at Sweigel Elementary. She is now director of elementary curriculum, the position that Sue Luthra used to have, and has been with us since the start of school, but maybe not before this group yet. So she wants to just briefly begin to talk about multi-tiered systems of support, not to inundate you with one more thing, but to help you begin to make sense of some of our initiatives. Is that a good way to lead in? Okay.
Great. Thank you. So Craig is going to pass around to you this graphic. It'll take just a minute to come around. While he's doing that, I want to spend just a minute giving you a high-level overview of what we mean when we say MTSS. First, I'm going to start with a question, though. How many of you have heard this acronym before? A few of you. Okay, great. So MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, and you're already doing this. So as educators in our schools, you're already differentiating for students. You're running small groups in your classroom. Some of you are involved in interventions at a Tier 2 or a Tier 3 level. So our schools are already doing quite a bit of this work. What we need to do at a district level, and this is information that some of you, if you're already participating in the Oregon RTI grant, have heard. Those of you who haven't will hear this soon from your principals. But what we need to do at a district level is standardize some of those systems. So I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about when I'm referencing standardizing systems. So for example, what are our decision rules when it comes to placing a student at the kindergarten level who struggles with phonemic awareness in an intervention? Do we have a standardized measure for that? And we do, it's easy CBM. And so with that standardized measurement, what is that threshold at which we say as a district, well, this student has shown that he or she is struggling enough that we need to intervene beyond what the student is getting in the classroom. So we need to standardize some of those types of things, like decision rules, like the intervention curriculum that we have available in our schools. I'm highly sensitive to the fact that right now, schools have what they have bought, and that's all you have. And that as a district, at least in the past many years, we have not provided across all of our elementary schools a standardized intervention curriculum. So those are some of the things that we're working on. We have right now 12 schools that are participating in the Oregon RTI grant. 5 of those schools started last year. 7 of those schools joined us this year. And we are looking at bringing the rest of the schools into that grant process and this RTI process over the next year or two. Okay. Couple of things now that everybody has access to this document. What you have in front of you there are just some quick facts about what MTSS is. And there's a few things that I want to emphasize on here. I'm not going to read this to you because you're all good readers, but here's what's important about this. One, all students have access to all tiers of instruction. And that means our struggling students have access to core instruction, as well as Tier 2 or Tier 3 instruction if that's what they need. The second thing that's important about MTSS is that we're talking about an umbrella system that includes behavior and academics. So we already have PBIS established in our schools. That's our behavior MTSS program. Our academic MTSS or RTI program, we have in many of our schools already in some form. We need to shore some of that up and standardize some of that. Okay. The last thing that I want to emphasize is that MTSS is an umbrella system that emphasizes the use of data to make instructions. So I gave the example already of Easy CBM and how we might use that to make decisions about whether or not to move a student to an intervention. We want to do that across academic and behavior systems in all of our schools. So your school's probably using SWIS. That's a system of data that you can utilize to make decisions about behavior interventions. We need similar systems on the academic side to be standardized across all of our schools. But data is a key component in this process because as educators, we tend to immediately go to the heart and we make decisions because we want to do what's best for kids. That's why most of us got into this profession. But we need data to ensure that we're making the decision that is meeting the right skill gap for that student, the exact skill gap for that student. And so that's where our data systems come into play. It also allows us to have objective conversations when it's sometimes really hard because we're talking about kids that struggle and we care. And we need to be able to pull those data points out so that the decisions that we're making are objective rather than subjective. So that's kind of a really high-level overview of MTSS and what's coming to you soon if it hasn't already come to your school. I know some of you are already participating in the Oregon RTI grant. Are there questions that I can answer for you? Yes?
It's not really a question, but an issue that comes to mind, what you're talking about. I understand the importance of data, but with both of those, with PBIS, with Swiss data, and Easy CBM, what comes to mind is that we need accurate data,
Mm-hmm.
and in both of those cases, we see a lot of inaccurate data at times. Sometimes with the Easy CBM, it's seen with the primary kids,
Mm-hmm.
or if they, depending on moods. So, I don't have any answers for that, but
Yeah.
I just think that's still something that we should consider when we're looking at data, is also asking, is this accurate data? And with the behavior data, like with teachers juggling the time to be able to input the data into Swiss, as well as still negative attitudes towards the whole system of PBIS.
So we still have some work to do, for sure. And I would add to that when we're talking about any kind of data used to inform decision making, the question we need to ask is this the only data point we have? If it is, we probably shouldn't be using just that one point to make a decision. You're absolutely right. Bad data in leads to bad decisions, and we need to be sensitive to that. But if we're looking at multiple points of data, that tends to be, that safety net that prevents us from making poor decisions based on a single data point. That's well said. Thank you.
Will there be a plan to help us collect this data? Because collecting the data that I'm already asked to collect while managing behaviors has proven to become more and more difficult over time, partially because of class size. I mean, I'm not trying to be negative.
Yeah.
I know where it's important, but I'm like, you said, well, you're working with small groups and you're pulling these kids, and I'm like, I'm lucky if we got to the carpet today. Like,
Sure.
That was a
Sure.
big accomplishment. So
Sure.
I'm trying to stay positive. So in this planning and this work, if there's systems to help us collect the data, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Because right now a lot of us can't.
That's something that we're talking about. We do have a steering committee working at the elementary level to help guide this work, and it's a very diverse representation across the district, including special education folks, We have some district folks there. We have one of our academic language coaches on the team. So we have many different people, some teachers represented there for that purpose, to make sure that as we're talking about systems that we're designing as we're doing the work, as Craig alluded to earlier, that we're mindful of the impact those systems might have on classrooms and how to minimize that impact, and in an even better situation, how to make your work easier. So the ultimate goal here is that we want systems in our schools that help us do our work and help kids learn so that they can move on to the next level prepared. So that's the goal that we're shooting for. Thank you for that.
You mentioned a steering committee, and in the committee you mentioned teachers. Are there elementary,
It's all elementary focused people.
and not just like the, I'm thinking special ed department people that come into the school? I mean, teachers that use EasyCBM every 3 times a week.
Yeah, so for example, we have the LRC teacher from Four Corners is one of the representatives who is quite savvy with EasyCBM and other sources of data. So we were pretty intentional about who we pulled into that team so that we maintain that elementary lens, because you're right, some of our support people support across multiple levels. But we also wanted a broad representation of voices in the group so that we remember to talk about our English learners and we remember to talk about students with disabilities, while we're also talking about behavior and we're talking about classroom instruction and the other components of MTSS. Yes, ma'am.
I want to bring up a key point that we've really struggled with, like EasyCBM and so many others, is that we just don't get enough training.
Yeah.
Last year, we were just stabbing in the dark. I didn't get to go to any trainings. We didn't know. We were just guessing, checking. We're still in that mode with our IAs who are trying to help us. They're not getting trained, so we're having to use our coach, our mentor coach person. She's helping us fill in that gap sometimes, but sometimes we're just flying by the seat of our pants trying to even figure out some of those systems.
May I ask a clarifying question? Training for use, training for interpretation, training for both? All. Okay. All right. That's a good point, and we will include that in our planning. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions? All right. Well, if you have any questions, please reach out to me via email or telephone. I'm happy to spend some time talking to you about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Caitlin, could you come up as well? So most of you should know who I am, Bob Silva, Director of Technology, and I'm on to introduce Caitlin Combus. She's got a fancy title, but she's just a really smart person over at the business office that's helping address some improvement efforts in the district. So one of the efforts that we're working on right now is how to make Insight 24J, or you may have heard it as SharePoint, more useful to the classroom teacher specifically. So some of that is addressing, just answering the question, what type of content, what type of things are you currently using it for? So when you think about if you use Insight 24J, what type of content are you going there for? And do we have a note taker? Well, we have video. Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, I use it a whole lot less than I did when it was just the CIA old website. I use that all the time, and I use this a whole lot less than that in general. But if I'm on there, it's usually English language arts, finding the post assessments for data team and ELD resources, and that's about it.
Okay.
See, the hardest part actually is the K-12 resource library, going in and figuring out where to find things, because things are labeled different than what we would normally look under that title. It doesn't make sense to us, and it's broken up. And I know that they've been working on that,
Right.
but when all that data, a couple years ago, remember when all that stuff sort of got transferred over? So I think that's still kind of iffy, like, where do I go in to type this? How do I type it in and define what I need? Like what I just, the day I was trying to find something, I can't think of it right now the specific thing, but I was trying to find it, I'm typing it in, and I'm like, nothing's really popping. Oh, I know what it was. It had to do with ECRI, because I was hoping there were some videos, which I found, I guess later they did post something. But just the ECRI thing, there was just like this little couple snapshot that you used, but it took me a while to find it, and it just wasn't really helpful. Wasn't what I was looking for. But
It wasn't labeled as ECRI.
yeah, I think it was, but it wasn't really even helpful information. But I tried to type it in, and I typed it in a certain way. Like I can't remember now exactly how, but it was just getting in there. It was difficult.
Like if we have easy CBM, we need to be able to pull that up right away. It shouldn't take us more than 2 clicks. We have to find that resource really quick. The curriculum resources for writing standards, those kind of things. It used to be attached to the EPR a long time ago, whatever, for each area of grading. Now it's very difficult to find, and we've had people looking like for it in all kinds of places, like the writing continuum, those kind of things. So it's just really frustrating. It used to be like on the U drive, and I don't know where those things have been swallowed up.
I know as a specialist, I will use
Microphone, so we'll capture the audio on the video. It's not gonna
Kill me. Okay, fine. As a specialist, I know I don't use a lot of those, but I will go into the Student Services tab and Employee Self-Serve and Launchpad. But one thing I find is if I'm looking for something specific, I miss the old QAM where I could type in something and find a form, because now I can type in something like, I don't even know what, and I will get the weirdest results. And so sometimes it will take me like 20 minutes to go through each individual department and go, oh, there it is. It's under curriculum, to find cut scores for SBAC. And when I try and type that into the QAM, like I said, I get really weird things. So I tend to use it just for more, Munis and Launchpad type things, and then student services.
Anybody else?
Mine's pretty similar. It's just using the search bar like more effectively when I type things in. I get a lot of broken links, or like I've gotten past years. I can find like the 16-17 school year or find the different ones, and it's not quite the one I'm looking for. I was looking for tuition reimbursement, and I had to remember that path, and so I had to go back to the specific buttons that go there. If I searched it, I got really funny ones or things that said that the page wasn't available. And I use it mostly for the K-12 resources, but if there's a way to add more keywords that'll pull it up into a search box, if it's kind of a shortcut, it would be helpful too, because I can find it. It just takes a while.
The way I use it a lot of times is to look for specific departments, and a lot of them are nested in bizarre places. I find like data research and assessment is under TIS. I don't know that most people would necessarily think to look under TIS. Trying to find the Office of Behavioral Learning is always an adventure for me. I'm like, is it strategic initiatives or K-12 or which one? So a lot of the departments are like, there's very few items listed under departments, but the way it's organized and the way things are nested under those, I have a super hard time finding, and I'm not alone. I have colleagues who've exhibited the same questions and concerns. So.
The front page news. Right. It's there. You see it when you go there, but
It's not our most important.
right. So how do you stay informed on what's going on in the school district? And I'll repeat as people.
I get the Monday, whatever.
The Monday
that
notes?
goes out. Yeah, Monday notes.
From your principal or at the district
I
level?
signed up for it through the district.
You signed up?
Not a
Oh, the Monday
principal, but
minutes.
Monday minutes, thank you. So that's where I get most of my.
Okay. There's a hand raised over here in the Christmas sweater.
I look at the insider.
At the Insider?
2 weeks, and I learned a lot of things from it, and I recommend it at my building that they watch that, because for me it was a really big eye-opener.
Right. And that's the Video Insider? Yeah. So obviously your principal's emails, Monday notes, that's a common one. We heard earlier instructional mentors or instructional coaches in your building are a prime communicator. How widespread is that at the elementary level? So. What other mechanisms are your primary communication channels? Who else do you listen to? So you delete 90% of your emails. Who are the 10%?
Well, you.
Yeah. Well,
If we know it's you.
right. Yeah, that's the key part. If you know it's me.
Bonus points.
Yeah.
I work with the music program, and so a lot of the communication comes through the music program office to some directors and music teachers.
Okay.
Some of our teachers are itinerant, so we are a source of communication.
Right. Okay.
I use the district website, so I was just looking at this and was like, oh, I do all of that, but through the district website. Even while I'm at school, I just go to the district website and do the plus and get to all that stuff. So I
Right.
do see like what's going out to the community, but not like specifically for internal.
So you use it for accessing services.
Yeah, like
Basically the links list.
all that. Yeah.
Okay.
I think phone dialers is the other place I get my information. Like, so my building, if stuff calls out, they call it out to staff,
Right.
so we know what's going on.
So school messenger.
District, oh, I don't know, my phone rings and it goes to the district. Oh, recorded message.
Okay. And is that sufficient? Do you feel like you know what's happening in the school district outside of this meeting, what you hear here?
It's like a puzzle, every little piece. We get a little bit here, a little bit here, and then we put together and make a big puzzle, and we hope we get it all. But we know there's gaps.
Right.
So.
Yeah, because I get stuff here, and then when I
Yeah.
did union, I would find out more. And then other people go, how do you know this? And it's like, well, because I go to union meetings in here, and I'd find out. And it would be nice to have more on here, too.
If it was all available in one place online, would that be useful? That's a trick question.
If it was easy to find.
Some of us don't do the clear thing, so.
Right. And there's time issues, having time to actually go and access. And then we're a big school district. We have lots of information that may or may not be relevant. You mentioned music program specific information. It's probably not something that we need to share with the whole school district. So how can we narrow it down to just the different programs and information that you need? So that's the challenge that we're trying to solve. I don't know if we can, but we're going to keep trying. But more specifically with Insight 24J, in time, hopefully not too much time, that will look completely different one day and hopefully much more relevant to you as teachers.
It'd be good to get more from principals, too.
Hmm?
It'd be good to get more from principals, because we get Monday notes, but it's often just a weekly calendar. So instead of saying, hey, like you said, check out this,
Right.
you know, on the Insight 24.
Right. Any other questions, comments on feedback on Insight 24J?
One more thing is maybe district, department phone numbers and easy access to finding out. Like, we used to have in a calendar, like who's the contact person in certain departments, curriculum or HR, you know, payroll or whatever.
Right.
And I don't-
It's on there. It's in the bottom right of the front page, and there's also the communications department maintains a department quick list phone number list in the QAM.
Okay.
It's just knowing where to go though.
And that's the problem is we have tons of information, and we don't have an encyclopedia or table of contents to look it all up.
So I think
Table
maybe part of the
contents.
problem is with the change, like no one ever trained us with this is, like, so we got kind of some of the information like at the meeting here, and I remember I went back and shared a couple of things with this, but, yeah, but like when things have changed, we haven't necessarily like all been able to sit down as a staff, at a computer, and be like, oh, this is where this is now.
Right. So training resources, when we do train, some training resources to go or change training resources go along with that would be beneficial. Okay.
And maybe principals could put that in like a 5 minutes to the staff meeting, some new feature or something, because it's like on my own time, it's like I got way other stuff I'm doing than to watch that video. But our staff did have somebody come tell us something about using it, because I remember they told us a specific way to search for things, like the grade level first, the subject. I still don't do it right, but somebody did try to tell me something at some point.
We got kind of told that too, but
Okay. Well, they're not done yet, or are you? Do you have, are there more agenda items?
Yeah, we have enough boundaries.
Oh.
How about, want me to just jump in and do it?
Okay. Thank you.
I'll do Karma a favor here. Okay, here's where we are in the boundary change process. I'm going to narrow it down to just what you need to know. We did open houses Tuesday. The task force meets again next Tuesday night to come up with what we hope is their final recommendation that comes to me and the board in January. So, and if people say, well, we didn't know, we haven't had input, which parents might say once they start, sometimes they don't pay attention until they pay attention. When the board ultimately makes the final decision. So I will say I'm very proud of the fact of how many parents we got out in every feeder area. It was a big deal. I think we got better about how we engaged parents, how we were sure that we were really meeting the needs of especially our Spanish-speaking parents. We had, 100 in at Four Corners, 150. We had 100 or more at Kennedy. I think there were 75 to 100 at Waldo, 250 at Judson, but you were 250 at Judson. Yeah, but we got 100 at the others. So anyway, but that's where we are in the process. Feedback came to us Tuesday. Task force meets again next Tuesday. We'll go before the board. We're still hoping in January. We will begin implementing boundary changes next year. That's our goal. So there'll be lots more to come on boundary changes. Good today to be separate? Yeah. Yeah, they liked it too. It's not that they don't like you. They felt like they got a chance to talk about the topics that were